Through our lives, we always express opinions about things. We make judgments on ourselves, on other people. We pass comment on the TV programs that we watch. We tell our friends about the experience of buying things online. And when we go out to eat, we share our experiences of that. That happens all the time in our daily lives, from children expressing whether they actually like to be cuddled to adults about how they interact. It's a natural part of our human existence. My name is Mahmood. I'm a numbers guy by trade, and I help businesses cope with their numbers so they can actually survive and thrive. We're talking about the magical world of measuring today, and that little introduction that we had in our human interaction, I'm going to take that same thought process and actually dump it into our business. Now, you might be thinking quite naturally, well, why should I care about what other people think? Does it matter? Absolutely, 100%. It matters because if you're in business, then one assumes that you've got an objective to make money, to make profit. You have an objective to survive, to make impact to your customers. And if that is one of your key objectives, and it should be, then you need to understand what's going on. So in this presentation, this short presentation, we're going to be talking about measures. Lots of people abbreviate that to KPIs. If you've heard KPIs and you've got a slight panic attack, anxiety, you want to stab yourself with a pencil, just relax, put the pencil down, and let's go through. We're going to cover three key things today. We're going to talk about the why we should bother. We've touched upon that briefly. We're going to talk about what we should measure. And we've got to be careful here not to get overwhelmed with a bunch of measures which do absolutely nothing. And then we're going to talk about the how. At the end of this short broadcast, I'm going to share some tips with you, a couple of takeaways here that you could implement in your business, whether you're an acorn-sized business or a massive aspiring oak. In terms of if you're just coming up on replay, if you hit the hashtag replay, or hit the hashtag, type in hashtag replay, hashtag live, I'll pick up your comments, feedback on them accordingly. So that's enough from me as an intro. Let's get on with the broadcast. If you feel you want to share some comments, feedback, then please by all means do that. And I've got my colleague here, Dr. Joe North. Good morning to you, Joe. So my first, I suppose, point to raise is, why should we bother? Why should we be bothered about what people think, about how people react, how people behave, what their opinions are? Well, for me, it's absolutely important, because when you're in business, you are going to be interacting with a whole group of diverse people. You're going to be interacting with your customers, and if you're not, something's going wrong. You've got suppliers who are going to be supplying goods and services to you. It's important that we know what's going on in that dimension. You're going to have staff, freelancers. So you are in the center of a universe where you've got interactions with a whole collective of individuals and businesses. Knowing how they interact, how they impact on your business is going to be vital if you want to achieve your end goal, your destination, your Northern Star. If you wish to make a profit, well, typically you need to know, am I actually achieving that? And if you don't have some idea of measuring something, there's an old adage that says, if you don't manage something, you're going to find it very difficult to move your business forward. So you manage what you measure. If something is important, and we're going to talk about the how and the what later on, then you need to make sure you've got some way of capturing what's important in your business. Does it matter what your suppliers think? Do they deliver on time? Do they give you good quality products and services? Absolutely. Does it matter what your staff are thinking about whether they're enjoying working within your environment? Are they dissatisfied? Are they motivated? Is that important to you? Well, it should be. Is it important that your customers get a positive experience? Not just the actual product or service that you're delivering, but the whole experience from delivery to subsequent post-sales. All those interactions are absolutely vital. So the whys is because if you don't measure something, what's important to you, then you're going to find it very difficult to move the dial on your business forward. The next thing is, if we've moved past the why we should bother and it's absolutely critical. People's feedback, how they interact, their behavior. And by people, by the way, we're referring to not just individuals, but corporate entities, businesses, whoever has an impact and an interaction with your business, whether it's a perfect stranger who might eventually become a happy customer, whether it's a supplier. It's vital that we capture the essence of what's going on. The next part of that is, what do we measure? Now, in my experience here, people get carried away slightly and produce a whole plethora of measures which don't actually have any positive impact in your business. And it's not about just the measuring, by the way. So what we should measure, we start from the first proposition, is what is important to us in our business, what is important in our business that actually gets us towards that end objective. So we've always got to start with our own personal Northern Star. Where is that end destination? This is where we are. As we make that journey to progress to where we want to be, that's what we've got to measure. Now, we measure that progress. Now, for me, typically, I would probably not over obsess just on measuring how much profit you're making, even though that's really key. How much money in the bank, even though that's key. I'd actually take a more balanced approach. And a balanced approach here typically might take something terms of looking at your customers. So think about what's critical for your customers that they come back to you and buy again. What's critical to your customers that they actually engage with you in the first place? What's critical to make your customers say, do you know what? I love you so much. I'm going to share that my experience with other people and take them on that experience with me and that journey. When it comes to the people who deliver that product and service, what's absolutely key to make sure that actually happens? Now, I've just spotted here a great comment from Joe. I'm just going to share that. Let's take a pause while I grab a little drink. And that's an absolutely true statement. And in terms of the what gets measured gets done. Think about the idea of transparency. Thanks for that, Joe. So think about that transparency. So if we think something is important to our business, so in other words, we think customer satisfaction, having delighted customers is really critical. If you don't somehow measure that, if you don't somehow have that documented in front of you, if you don't see it, if you don't visualize it, it's likely to slip under the radar. We all lead very busy, hectic lives. And if we don't actually do something and have some form of, if you want, structure, to give it a better term here, we're less likely to act on that. So we come back to our customers and we think, okay, one of our key objectives has got to be having satisfied customers. No, that's a great aspiration, and all of us in the main should be aiming for that. Well, one thing we might measure is how long we keep that customer for. Do we retain that customer? What's the life cycle of retaining it? If customers come and go and they don't come back to purchase, that would tell me something might be going slightly askew. How much are customers buying from us? What's the spend that they are making with us? What's the comments from our customers? We're going to talk about the how later on, but measuring the customer profitability. Do customers give feedback to us? So those are important to give me an insight to that. If we take a couple of other angles, finance, obviously, we can't run a business without being conscious of the financial data, the financial numbers. We're in a business to make profit. We're in a business to perform positively, and therefore knowing how much money we're making, how much profit we're generating is going to be key. What we should do, though, when we decide what to measure what's important. So if you are a retailer, typically one headline number that's going to be really important to you is what's called the gross margin or the gross profit that you're making in your retail business. If you don't measure that, if you don't have transparency, if you don't see what's going on with the gross margin, then you're missing a trick, and you're going to find business going to be very, very difficult to move forward. You might also think cash in the bank. So having good cash flow, which is vital for pretty much most businesses, is important. So that's what I need to measure. What else? Well, you might be, if you're a manufacturer, then looking at the cost of manufacture per each item, per each bat, is going to be an important consideration for you. It may be that materials are a big key component of your product, so you need to measure what the cost of the materials are. If we talk in terms of quality, notice we've got a whole bunch of stuff going on here. And what we're going to try and do in a moment is to think about focus. The criticality to all of this is measure what's important to your particular business, not somebody else's business, not your competitors, but to you, in order to get to that destination point that you've flagged up. So if we're thinking a manufacturer that's quality, a manufacturer typically would measure things like downtime. What's the level of rework that has to go through to put that product? What's the level of scrap? What's the level of wastage? A whole bunch of considerations there. Let's pick a couple more here. So let's think about a service-based business. So a service-based business, so perhaps delivering workshops, perhaps delivering consulting, perhaps delivering professional services to them. They're going to think, actually, what's really going to be important to our business there? Well, one of them might be the speed, the turnaround time from getting an assignment. Perhaps if you're a lawyer, if you're an accountant, what's the delivery time from start to finish of getting that piece of work done? You may depend on a good team of suppliers, freelancers and staff, and therefore you want to keep them happy, you want to keep them satisfied. And it's not just happiness for the sake of it, but it's an expensive thing to keep recruiting, retraining staff if staff are actually leaving. So things like staff absences, staff turnaround will be a very important thing to measure. Fundamentally, if we don't capture those things that are important, then we're going to lose sight of them. One key thing to share here in terms of tip about how do we know what to measure, start with the destination. What is critical for me to actually successfully get to that Northern Star, that end point? I would typically choose no more than about 4 to 6 key measures. And I would typically then make sure those ones are the ones that are going to impact on my journey path. And that's the things that I would focus on. You can do lots of different things. Armed with a spreadsheet on steroids, it's very easy to get overwhelmed with a load of numbers. Now, that's only part of the equation. Measuring is important, absolutely critical, but it's what we do once we've got those numbers here. It's the managing part, which is as important as the measuring. If we don't measure, we can't do anything with that information. But once we've got the information, we've got to act with it. So let's think again, and typically, if we're thinking a retailer who's selling a product, one key measure for them, one key KPI might be the level of gross margin that's being made. Okay, great. We've captured that. We've got that gross margin. In an ideal world, we had set a target for that. So we might say for that product group, for that particular commodity, we wish to make a gross margin of, let's say, 60%. We capture, we record what that gross margin actually is. And what you've got there, you might have a gross margin in the area of, say, 55%. Now, here's where the power comes. I've said gross margins are really key, of 60%. That's my target. That's my aspiration. I've actually got a margin of 55%. There's a divergence there. What do I do? It's the what do I do? I drill down. I figure out what's going on. Is it a wastage issue? Is it a price issue? Have I reduced the price? Is it because my targets might be too ambitious? Have I been over ambitious in what I'm trying to achieve? Is there a high level of material content? Has there been a lot of stock that's been written down? All those things that come into play. Once I've identified what the issue is, I can then act and do something about that. But if I didn't capture the information in the first place, I wouldn't be able to do anything. Let's move that away. Let's think about customers. Now, we said to ourselves, customers are really important to us. Obviously, we don't have a business if we don't have customers. So critically, if we value customer satisfaction, one thing we might look at is maybe a measure of customer retention, average spend per customer. We might also look at something called lifetime value itself. So we get our customer and we've looked at it and say, typically, we expect a customer in this particular arena, in this particular sector, this particular commodity, to be spending with us an average, again, I'm making numbers up, of £100 per transaction. Now, when we then monitor how much our customers are spending, and they're spending in the order of £80, then we can revisit that and drill down to see why that is. Is it because something's gone wrong in the buying process? Is it because we've actually deliberately lowered the transactional value? Is it because there's something inherently going on under the bonnet that we're not aware of? Those numbers are like a dashboard on your motor car. So when you've got your odometer, I think that's what it's called, and it tells you the fuel gauge is low, then you can top up that fuel accordingly. When you've got the thing that says you're going too fast, you're going to be exceeding the speed limit, then you can reduce your speed down accordingly. And your numbers, your measures, your KPI dashboard, if you want to give it that term, which I love, is going to tell you what you thought was important, how your business is reacting, and then react accordingly. And this whole idea about KPIs, by the way, applies to any type of business, whether you're a social enterprise, whether you're a charity, whether you are a large corporate entity, it does not make any difference. If you're a solopreneur, if it's a side hustle, you've got to measure somehow what's important to your business, but you've fundamentally got to do something with that information. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. Again, if you're just coming up on the replay, so some good morning here to some live guests for B4B. Thank you very much for joining us today. Your company is very appreciated. In terms of the how now, and then I'm going to wrap up with a couple of tips to take away. Now, fundamentally, let's take a couple of those measures that we've highlighted. So we've talked about gross margin, we've talked about customer retention, customer spend, we've talked about staff being content, suppliers being happy. And why are we doing this? It's not because we're feeling very altruistic, but because we know that's critical to make our business a success. Well, the how, fundamentally, you've got to be able to say to yourself, okay, could I tell myself how much profit I made, for example, in the last month? Can I tell myself how much profit I'm expecting to make over the next few months? Do I know how much cash is in the bank? If you can't answer those questions immediately or relatively easily without adding up lots of numbers on a calculator, getting your super spreadsheets out, then I would suggest you've got a flawed engine here and you need to think about how to catch that information. So when it comes to financial data, I'll mention it here. The cloud is a great way to actually grab and capture those numbers and give you some of the insight. Other things as well. Let me just grab a glass of water. I'm just going to flag up a great comment from here from Joe. Now, I will just comment here at this stage. I'm just going to take a slight pause before we finish on with the how and tips. Joe is my friend and colleague on our Business Growth Club here. She's a creative inspiration in her own right, but she's perfectly right there. It's insight. And remember, the key thing is, by the way, a KPI, if we look at the wording, is a key. So it's what's critical. Performance is always about judging how we're doing, but it's an indicator. So it merely indicates something. It doesn't give you the absolute truth. So you've got to put some effort into this to digging down, drilling down and discovering what's going on. But a KPI is an absolutely, as it says, is a key. So what's critical for your particular business? It tells you about performance, i.e. how are you doing? And it indicates something, but you've actually got to act on it. You've got to manage it and respond accordingly. Now, the how. When we talk in terms of measures and KPIs, don't just think of actual financial transactions. Financial data is really key, but it's only part of the equations. So things like surveys are a KPI. Things like observations that we make, things like opinions that people express. Those are all examples of KPIs. A great example I can give you here, if you ever have been to an airport or a restaurant, a takeaway, you'll typically see on the toilet door, typically you might see a roster sheet and it will tell you the last time that toilet was cleaned. Now, I used to wonder why that was being done, and I thought about it in a bit more detail. In the context of the hospitality sector, in the context of the service sector or any business here, customers rate hygiene very highly. And effectively, believe it or not, it scores very highly in terms of a tick box for customers in the whole experience. So in order to reinforce that and to match that observation, what businesses do, they actually reinforce that point and they tell their customers and the people who are using that facility how often those toilets are cleaned. That's a key indicator for them. There's no massive amount of investment in super software to get that. It's an observation. Typically in airports, if we talked about it, people can just walk around, have a look what's going on here. So surveys, questionnaires, feedback, opinions, raw numbers, mix it up. Use some raw data, some financial data, but use some qualitative data as well. And again, you want insight to that. Now, in terms of tips, if you're relatively new to the world of measuring, if you think, well, okay, I think it's important, I'm going to look more into it, then if you're just at the start of your KPI journey, if that's something you don't normally do in your business, and again, I would recommend that you do so, then start off with a few headline numbers. So get used to, for example, looking at your bank statements, seeing how much cash is in the bank. Get into the habit of perhaps projecting forward and thinking how much cash should I have, and use that as a daily monitoring thing. If you're a retailer, if you're a business, obviously profit is a key thing. Profit is more important than selling, the sales value that you achieve. Then get yourself into the habit of looking at your gross margins on a weekly or monthly basis. If you're unable to do that, by the way, if you can't tell me relatively quickly how much profit you're making today, not in a year's time, not in 6 months' time when your accounts get done, but now, how much money you're spending, what you're spending it on, there is a serious defect in your business which you can easily put right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, B4B UK, for participating. If you like what's being said, obviously I'd love it if you could share it. If you've got any feedback to share, put them in the comments box. #replay, #live. Thank you very much for your company, everybody. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Ciao.